know you heard me on the radio. Flexing, she loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K. I know you heard me on the radio. Flexing, she loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K.
Scarlet Knights fans, Larry K. of Night Watch here as we discuss one final end to the Rutgers miserable basketball season. All expectations, all final hope, all last gasp optimism flushed as Rutgers goes down to USC 97-89. Rutgers being the 11 seed in the Big Ten tournament, USC being the 14 seed. And for the beginning of the game and most of the early first half, I thought Rutgers had pretty much mailed it in. As we'd seen in some of the games down the stretch, it looked like they weren't that interested. They weren't playing that well. USC doing what they had to do, playing more as a team, converting and doing the necessary things to get ahead. But in the second half, Rutgers comes out. They play hard defense. They do a lot different things defensively. And as is the case normally with Steve Peichel teams, when the defense is churning, they feed off that energy and they do well. I thought by the end of the second half, Rutgers was probably going to win this game. They looked fairly in control. They looked like they had a lead commanding enough in the final minute to bring it home. And I was optimistic. I thought, hey, you know what? Even though I don't necessarily think this team's going to go all the way in the Big Ten tournament, it would be nice at least to get some respect and put some respect on the RU name and survive the first night of the Big Ten tournament, get to stay out there in Indianapolis and get up and play another day. But Jemiah Williams misses 2 free throws. Rutgers cannot take care of business defensively down the final stretch. USC ties it. First overtime, I thought Rutgers came out swinging pretty well again. Again, a missed 3 in the last possession cannot put the game away. Second overtime, USC hits 2 big threes from way downtown, and that kind of puts the game out of reach. Rutgers has had a problem closing since our first exhibition game against St. John's. That never really changed. We never had the right go-to closer. We never quite figured out how to overcome adversity down the stretch and win games, but for a few very small examples in the season. Ace Bailey fouls out of the game, so he's not available late anyway. Some personnel decisions that my friend Aaron Brightman rightfully called out. Some strategic decisions, again, citing Mr. Brightman regarding the lack of Rutgers attacking the rim, which I think was a problem given USC's vulnerabilities there. Rutgers had a lot of success with that in the first game, but weren't able to exploit that this game. Dylan Harper, another very good game, 27 points, 8 assists, 8 boards, played his heart out, tried to will the team to victory. As we've seen so many times this season, Dylan Harper, when he's healthy, when he's locked in, he's trying, but it's just not enough, as we've also seen so many times this season. Ace Bailey finishes with 17 points, 7 boards, 2 assists. Story of the season was Ace was a pretty decent rebounder for the year, and we needed that, but just at the end of the day, it wasn't quite enough to get him over the hump. Lathan Somerville, 16 points, 5 boards, 1 assist. Acuff, 16 points, 5 boards, 4 assists. Not a lot from Durkak. Not anything from Martini, as, again, has been the story. And we go down, and it's a fitting end to the season, I would say. I didn't expect much from them in the Big Ten tournament. Kind of, to be fair, to be flat out honest, I'm kind of happy that we mercifully got to see the end, that we're not glued in for another night to this season that has been an abject failure. And I do think this season has been an abject failure. I don't think there's any other way you can spin it. I don't think there's any way you can paint it otherwise. This was an absolute failure. Yes, there are some people coming out on social media who are saying that Rutgers was a joke with the way that they had 2 top 5 draft picks and they couldn't even be in the discussion for the NCAA tournament or the NIT and get bounced in the first round of the Big Ten tournament. It's just not a good look in any way, shape, or form for this coaching staff, for this program. And, I thought it was evident early in the season. And I was one of the few people early in the season when we went out to Vegas and we only won 1 game, which was another overtime game. And it just didn't seem like, I get it. We played hard against good teams, against contenders, and you can't say they went out there and were absolutely lackluster or anything like that. But I said back then early in the season that Rutgers needed to finally get some wins. You got to turn some of these moral victories into wins because this is only for 1 year. And after this season is over, these guys are gone. You don't have another crack at it. This isn't a developmental year for guys that are going to be here. This is a new era. And at the end of the day, you need to start turning some of those moral victories into actual victories. And I was not happy with the results in Vegas because if this team was ever going to be any sort of contender, at least in the top 16 to go to the Sweet 16, they had to start beating some teams in the top 20. And that wasn't happening. And it only got worse. And that, remember, too, that was subsequent to the loss at Kennesaw State. So it wasn't as if I was sitting there, just throwing a fit because they didn't win against contenders early in the season as a young team. They had already had a bad loss to Kennesaw State, and then you didn't pull out any significant victories in Vegas. You come home, and I was worried with the style of play, and I was worried with what I was seeing. You get the loss to Princeton, fun game, but a loss that hurt really bad. And you barely beat Seton Hall. It's another game where everybody was excited because of the buzzer beater, but I didn't think necessarily that was a good performance. And that all came to fruition. This isn't to pat myself on the back and say, wow, I'm a negative Nancy and pessimistic. Now give me accolades. It's just to say that I think the issues with this team and the concerns were evident all along. And that was a problem with vision, in my opinion, a problem with strategy, a problem with everything with the program in terms of how am I going to take these two super talented players and form a team around them that's going to get us where we want to go and make us contenders and formidable in this league. It seemed from the very beginning that they didn't really have an idea of what to do. Now, you go all the way back to the first couple games, and I thought it was interesting how deep the team could be, how much scoring we could have on the bench from all over the court, but that never really came to fruition. And I think part of the reason it never came to fruition is we didn't have a set plan of, this is a defensive coach that excels in defensive strategy and defensive, development. And these are two talented freshmen who are not the best on defense. And if you include Lathan Somerville, that's another athlete with extreme potential on the offensive side of the ball, but who struggles mightily on the defensive side of the ball. We bring in a bunch of older players, which I think was probably a smart move to have senior players and veterans around younger guys. But they were all known for their shooting or scoring prowess. And as the season wore on, guys like P.J. Hayes became absolute non-factors. And guys like Zach Martini, some games he was a minuscule factor, and most games he was a non-factor. And these were guys you were trying to plug in to give you some sharp shooting ability. If guys drove the lane and freed up the perimeter and whatnot, you could kick it out, you could hit a shot. And none of that really ever happened because you never really had any semblance of an offensive identity or plan or a system to set these players up for success. And that is not new, right? It's not like Steve Peichel has been an offensive guru or anybody on the staff has been an offensive guru for years and all of a sudden they failed. That was never their forte. So you really should have honed in on improving in that area if you were going to construct a roster this way. And you had 2 years to figure out how to do it, by the way. Ace committed a while ago. Everybody, rumors were strong. Dylan was coming. I'm sure the team knew long before we knew that Dylan was coming. You had plenty of time to set this thing up. Plenty of time. And you didn't do it. And if you're not going to do it on the offensive side of the ball and you're kind of going to say, hey, freestyle, you guys are super talented, do what you do, then you should have invested or tried to retain guys who were more formidable on the defensive side of the ball and tried to maintain your identity somehow, some way. And we saw this season, some games they maintained their defensive identity or refound it, and they fared pretty well in those games. Some games they relied exclusively on offensive firepower, and when the guys, by pure luck or a run, were making threes and were unstoppable, Dylan Harper unstoppable at the rim, or Ace Bailey's having a great game, or one of these other guys emerges that game and is hot from beyond the arc, well, then they had success. But if that randomness and that luck of the draw didn't pan out on a given day, they couldn't get past the hump. They couldn't win. They couldn't make anything happen. And that became the story of the season. And it's an abject failure because you are a team that has had developmental players since since you got here. And your most successful seasons were when these guys were developed into formidable defensive players who could play offense and be clutch in moments when you needed them to. And it's not only this season that we went out in the portal and we didn't get the right players or we didn't use the players we got properly. It's also that for the past couple of years before this, we let guys walk. And I know a lot of the fans were down on, he's not a Big Ten caliber. He's not that great. He's not that great. He's not so good. Let him walk. Let him walk. Let him go. Everything is, this guy's not up to par. Let him go. Let him go. Let him go. Let him go. Well, some of the guys that Pike brought in for our most successful seasons, the first year, were not up to par either if you looked at them on the court or from the stat line. But over the course of their second and more so their third years, they were formidable, legitimate, decent players because they were coached up within the program. And I think Pike, I don't know if he bought into the hype a little bit. I don't know if the changing landscape of the NIL, which is also valid, maybe got the kids not wanting to stay and they got antsy and things just changed overall from that standpoint. But at the end of the day, it was just frustrating. And it is frustrating that we let so many guys walk, and for the last 2 years, we're constructing rosters on the fly, and for the last 2 years, we've been a disorganized mess. It wasn't just this year. People have recency bias because of the players on the team, but it wasn't just this year, okay? This goes back to last year, and I thought last year that what Pike was doing was trying to build this fast, offensive team that was going to run, that was going to shoot. All those things he talked about this year, he talked about last year because his plan was when these two talented freshmen come in, I'm going to run, we're going to be fast, we're going to be ultra athletic. And that was going away from his philosophy. And there were indications that it wasn't going to work last year. And those indications came true this year. And it really caused a real problem. And it's a crisis of identity going forward. It's a crisis of identity going forward. Some season stats for you. Dylan Harper played in 29 games. Unfortunate that he had the flu. Unfortunate he got banged up later in the year. We will never know what would have happened had Dylan been healthy the entire year. Clearly the glue for this team. Clearly the best player we had. Clearly ultra talented and in a bygone era. If he had stayed a couple years, I think we'd all be very happy with the future and the outlook, but that's not the case. He's gone. We had him for 1 year. Everybody knew that was the case to start. 29 games, averaged 32 minutes, averaged 19.4 points, averaged 4.6 boards, averaged 4 assists, and his field goal percentage, 48%, free throw percentage, 75, 33.3 from 3. And I think that was a revelation that worked out well for Rutgers. I think, and there were games where he was inconsistent, but overall, I think, it was a revelation that he was not bad from 3. It was welcome in a lot of games, but again, just not necessarily the guy down the stretch that you could rely on every game and not consistent enough. That was never his game or supposed to be his game. Ace Bailey played in 30 games, averaged 17 points, averaged 7.2 rebounds. And so he was really the leading rebounder as far as average on the team. You could look at that two ways, right? In one sense, you could sit there and say, okay, well, Ace had a high average of rebounds. He did his job playing like a big guy down low, and that's what we needed from him. Because I did say that early in the season. I said we need that from Ace. If we're going to ever be contending for anything, this is a weak rebounding team. Ace is going to have to step up. Now, in a lot of games, Ace did step up and fill that void and grab boards. The other way to look at that, though, is that if Ace Bailey was one of your best rebounders, and he's more of a swing player who's a freshman who's supposed to be creating more, from the outside in, then him being one of your best rebounders and having to rely on him means that the team was not going to fare well and did not fare well, and they didn't. I mean, Ace Bailey relying on him to be one of your key rebounders, I think, is indicative of how much of a failure this offseason was in terms of bringing in a big man or more people to play down low. And we saw the effects of that in so many ways. Ace Bailey, 34.6 from 3 percentages, 69% free throw shooter, 46 from the field. Lathan Somerville, the other talented freshman, averaged 8.2 points a game, averaged 4 boards a game, averaged 0.6 blocks. He was 11% from three. Not that we thought he'd be a great three-point shooter, but Somerville was 86% from free throws, and that was a pretty darn good revelation. His free throws are probably some of the best stuff we've seen in years. It was always a pleasant surprise when you have a big man who can get fouled, get to the line. The problem with Somerville, and look, he's a freshman. And if I'm Steve Peichel or I'm a Rutgers fan, I am hoping that we keep Lathan Somerville next year, because he's the kind of player that can stay for a couple of years and will develop and will be a really good player offensively, in my opinion. Now, he hustles. He's got the right kind of, vehement attitude, I see. He's got that edge to him, and if he can hone that and harness that into defense, he struggles with defense. If he can become a better defensive player and improve even more on his offense, I think he can be really formidable, because one of the things that was frustrating this year was he's a really good free throw shooter. Really good free throw shooter, but he's not taking it strong enough to the rim frequently enough to get fouled enough to get to the line as much as he should have, right? I mean, a lot of what he was taking, he was settling for shots a few feet from the rim, settled for the three this game, that happens, settled for, things outside closer to the foul line, and, these turnaround jumpers, which they look pretty. He's good at them. He's got a nice touch on his shot. He's got a nice touch overall in his offensive game. But if he could take it stronger a little bit more and take advantage of his ability from the free throw line, I think they could have fared better, and he can be a real asset either to Rutgers or to somebody else. Shot 50% from the field. I liked his abilities on offense. Sadly, on defense, he couldn't fill the void of a Cliff Amore, and and so it's tough. It's of a Miles, he couldn't do it, and Steve Peichel teams require that, and a lot of teams require that, and he couldn't fill that void, especially on the defensive side. So it wound up being tough. Acuff, averaging 5 points a game was not what we needed from him. Jeremiah Williams, 7 points a game, not terrible, but you thought maybe he'd be a little bit more of a key player in this thing. PJ Hayes, under 3 points a game average to end the season, just not good enough. And, you look at their three-point percentages. Zach Martini's three-point percentage was 36.3, so still, closer to one of the highest on the team, but it just wasn't consistent enough. He wasn't a factor often enough, and it didn't wind up actually making a huge impact on the games. PJ Hayes, 32% from three, lower than Ace and Dillon, only slightly above Jeremiah Williams, so it wasn't a ton great for him either. So it's just, Dylan Harper, 564 points, ended the season with it, 133 rebounds. Ace Bailey, 215 rebounds. Harper, 117 assists. Bailey, 38 blocks. I mean, so Bailey's athleticism was on sheer display, and it's a shame, I think, again, and I can belabor this point over and over and over again, but it's just a shame that the game is what it is, and these guys are gone in a year. Because when you look at guys like Ace Bailey, and you look at guys like Dylan Harper, obviously, but even guys like, these guys have all the tools and attributes. I mean, Bailey really showed something on the boards and on defense at times that if there were time to develop him and make him into a more mature player for Rutgers, it would really be a sight to see. But that's not going to happen. It's going to happen at the NBA level. And another thing I think that's affecting the game with guys that are, quick NBA picks is the NBA is a different game. AAU is a different game. The game is different. When you play it in the Big Ten and you play it in college, you got to play defense better. You got to be more organized. And, the NBA, I know there's a lot of people really excited and still thinking it's a big deal that these two guys are going to the NBA draft. They're lottery picks, and it's going to give publicity and all that. And I think some people, to be honest with you, were super excited and hyped up about that fact before the season even started. And when you talked about, well, how does this help Rutgers? What does this look like for Rutgers? Can Rutgers rely on freshmen? The response was so often, well, these guys are top 5 picks. These guys are NBA draft picks. I don't care. Like, I'm not a big NBA fan. Maybe I'm an old crotchety man. You can call me that all you want, but I'm not a big NBA guy, and I haven't been since the 90s. I just don't. I mean, maybe the early 2000s, 08, 09 maybe. I mean, the 3-point derby is not fun to me. The lack of defense, the guy sitting out, it's not the type of game that I think is a great product right now, to be honest with you. And some people may disagree. That's a matter of preference. That's fine. But it's a different style of play. And somebody like Bailey will do well in the NBA, will continue to develop. Same with Harper. But will they ever develop their true defensive abilities, beyond what they are? I don't know, because that league doesn't necessarily emphasize that. Of course, they're going to get better on both sides of the ball. But you look at a guy like Bailey and what his stat line was and what his sheer athleticism is, and you look at him and he still looks like a kid because he is a kid. And you think about, wow, if this guy had 3 more years under his belt, imagine the kind of player he could be and what a force he could be. And it's a shame, and I've said it on this podcast before, I'll say it again. I mean, you got guys like Rick Pitino saying, I'm not taking 5-star freshmen. I don't care how highly rated a freshman is. You can't win in this league or at this level with freshmen. Guys are 24, 23, 25 playing ball, and they have a lot more years under their belt. A talented freshman is a talented freshman, but all freshmen are raw. And it's only so far that they can take a team on their backs with no other guys contributing who are older and more seasoned. And so it's a shame when you look at this and you look at these players and what their potential could have been, because it's freshman potential, but we're never going to see it realized because they're off to the NBA. And speaking of them being off to the NBA, what's next for Rutgers basketball? What do I think is next for Rutgers basketball? Well, I don't think Steve Peichel is going anywhere. Now, that could change. There could be some revelation, maybe on Steve's end, maybe on the school's, maybe mutually. I mean, this was an abject failure any way you cut it. I don't know what Steve's headspace is like after, you build a program. And it's changed in this era. But there's still some semblance, and there's got to be in Steve's mind, because Steve's from the old school and he came here as a program builder. And this is what fans have always said, and this is what you hope for as a college sports fan. I don't know what's going to happen in the future as college sports goes through such vast changes, but you get into a program, you build that program for a few years to get it to a point where it's respected enough and it becomes a thing enough, and there's enough hype around that program that it becomes a destination. And the goal in it becoming a destination is to attract marquee players, marquee recruits, like we did with Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. And then to take those premier recruits and make a further run and have more success than you would have had with the scrappy guys, and then to create and perpetuate that attraction for marquee guys and to continue the success. And for Steve, who did take the program from the bottom up and did make it an attraction and did make it a desirable place and did bring interest to it and got Rutgers over a hump it hadn't been in 30 years, and winning a NCAA game, making the tournament a few years in a row, and they were I think maybe one of their best teams was the one with Akwazi Yaboa, and that season, the COVID season, I think was a promising season, and who knows what could have happened that year too, and Steve might have even more notches in his resume. But then you have typical Rutgers Steve Peichel team fashion. You're losing to Houston with some sloppy passes and some other, breakdowns late in the game. You could have won that game, and then the way the bracket was set up, you probably would have made a Sweet 16 run. I mean, not a Sweet 16 run. You were going to the Sweet 16. You could have made a Final Four run. And that's not out of the question, but that didn't happen. And so you build up to the culmination of these marquee players, which Steve did. I mean, you have a legacy guy in Dylan Harper because you recruited his brother who became a premier player. You made Rutgers a destination sufficient to attract guys like Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper, and then guys like Somerville and Cliff Amore before that. And then if the payoff of that climax is being left out of the tournament 2 years in a row and being bounced early from the Big Ten tournament and overall losing season, I don't know what that does to a guy's psyche. I certainly know it's not good for a program's psyche. It's not good for a fan base's psyche. So maybe, I don't know what's going on in Steve's head. And no one does. What I do know is that I don't think the university is in a position with no president and no AD, and with Steve's contract and the success that he had prior. I don't think the university's in a position to move on. So Steve's coming back, and he can go a few different ways, right? Steve can, first of all, you got to retain the players that you think are vital to retain. And if I'm Peichel, I'm trying to keep Somerville. I'm trying to keep Grant. I'm trying to keep Dortch. And I'm trying to build around these guys who have, Dortch and Grant specifically have the makeup of a Peichel player who can be developed over several years and become hard-nosed, gritty players that can execute Steve Peichel's philosophy and game plan. And Lathan Somerville has the ability to be a premier player, a premier forward in the Big Ten who can really be a focal point of an offense. You got to coach him up on defense. And you got to see who else is staying and who else you could bring in. And you've got to have, a 3-year plan to implement it. And next year can't be a step back even from what this year is, because your seat's going to be on fire, especially if we get a new AD who wants to make their mark on the university. You've got to have a plan. It's got to show improvement next year. You've got to be more consistent next year. Even if you're not an excellent winning team, you've got to show that toughness. You got to show that grit. You got to show that effort the whole season. And I know late in the season, I don't blame these kids. I kind of lost interest. I wasn't paying attention. So, and I cover the team. So if they, if I wasn't really locked in, I'm sure they weren't locked in, and I can't really blame them. But you got to have those guys who are scrappy and locked in and are looking not just for this year, but for the next year. And you've got to see that come to fruition on the court. And it starts with seeing who you're going to keep. Now, there's rumblings. Maybe Somerville's gone. Rumblings. Obviously, people are going to come calling. That's what happens every year now in the new era of college basketball. But we first see who you're going to keep and who you can keep. Then you got to decide, are you going to be somebody who's going to be a mercenary team every year, bringing in all these guys like college basketball wants to happen as a whole, the way it's pulling everybody? In which case, you're going to need to bring in some help in terms of a GM type person, and many people on many podcasts, the Rutgers Rant, they've talked about this, bringing in a GM type figure to figure out how to divvy out funds, how to build a roster, because it doesn't seem like Steve Peichel is very strong at doing that on the fly. Maybe just having, somebody to lean on, some other voice in the room can help him in that regard. You bring in somebody like that. You bring in, maybe you make some changes in the coaching staff, get somebody who could coach better offense, has a better ability to get guys coached up on the fly to score and play consistent offense. On the other hand, which I think is the better move for Steve Peichel, you get back to your roots. You get guys in who can play defense, who want to play defense, who want to rebound, who are gritty and tough in that way, who are relentless, tip off to end of the game fighters with high energy, who want to stick with their guy, who want to press, who want to do those things, who want to box out. And the guys on your roster already that can do that, you keep. You go out and get other guys, you recruit guys, and you spend most of your effort and money on retaining those players year to year. And it starts this year with guys like Lathan. You spend the money to keep them here. And you become a developmental program the way Shiano does it with football. You spend your effort in NIL on keeping guys. You're never going to be the marquee team with the marquee names. We were the marquee team with the marquee names this year, and it didn't do a damn thing for us. So why bother? You can compete with those guys. You get a NCAA berth every couple years, hopefully a couple years in a row, the way we were at his pinnacle. And you hope to get a good seed and a chance to make a run in the tournament a couple years. But the seasons are more fun. You have chances in the Big Ten tournament. You're competitive in league. And it's just a better product for everybody. And the hype is real and it's fun. The problem with that philosophy is it's going to be hard for Steve to get the grace and the time to implement another plan like that when we've had 2 seasons that were such abject failures and real disappointments, this year being the most exemplary of that. How long does he have to implement that plan? And even then, I think you need a GM type person to figure out roster construction. And even then, you're going to lose guys and you're going to have to get guys in the portal because of how this league is now. And I don't know that Steve Peichel, the way he coaches, the way he builds programs, the way that his philosophy is, I don't know that Steve Peichel is going to ever be able to master that way of running a program with either option. And that might just be the harsh reality of a changing landscape. And that might be bad news for Rutgers right now and maybe even going forward. I don't know. But I do know that that's probably the best road forward for him. And if you're a Rutgers fan who wants to see some competitive ball and you don't want to just tune out basketball again, then you hope that Steve gets back to just his roots as a gritty, competitive team. Keep the guys with the most potential. Start coaching them up. They're going to be a year older. Bring in some guys with that same gritty attitude and at least, field a competitive team night in and night out, where you never have to worry about, being embarrassed by lower tier teams. You don't have to worry about the fact that you're wildly inconsistent. Just give a chance and at least give the fans and the team, your teammates, some semblance of knowing what you're going to get every night and some level of consistency. And that's probably the best he can do. So once again, an end to a brutal season of epic disappointments. I think anybody, and I see a lot of anger out there right now, as if people really still were clinging. You got to stop it for your own sanity, guys. You got to just be more objective. I mean, if you were clinging to the idea that we were actually going to win the Big Ten tournament and get a seed, and you're that angry today, I mean, you missed the boat a month ago, 2 months ago. This team was a long, slow burn of a train wreck. This wasn't an abrupt end to the season. So you should have seen this coming. You should have adjusted accordingly, and no one should be surprised about this. It doesn't make what could have been, and it doesn't make the disappointment any less, harmful or painful, but you got to adjust your expectations as you see what comes in. Some of these signs were evident early in the season, and I understand people being disappointed, but sometimes you got to just call a spade, and we saw a lot of this coming, as sad as it is. So Rutgers season officially over. The Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper hype train going on for several years officially gone. And Rutgers now moves on. The world moves on. Those young men move on. And it was a dream that never came to fruition, a dream that could have been. And I think it's a reality check when we just look at things and are aspirational rather than objective and based in reality as we analyze things. Guys, I will have more content for you as the transfers start. I will have more content as we further discuss the offseason for both basketball and football. I will collaborate and try to get some guests on to do some innovative, cool content for you guys. If you haven't done so yet, please click that subscribe button on your way out. It's right there. Click it. Bring your mouse. Click it. Click it really quick. And get me to 1,000 subscribers. We are really close. We've built this channel over the course of a couple of years. You guys have been awesome. Shouts to all my loyal listeners. Shouts to the College Huddle and to the Big Ten Huddle guys who have put me on and also collaborated. It's been an excellent, fun journey. The journey is far from over. It's just beginning. We are going to have football content as well. So stay tuned here to the Night Watch channel. I'm sorry that it ended this way for us, but forever in our hearts will be our Scarlet Knights. Go RU.